So Quartz is a business news organization. We launched in 2012, and when we launched then, we tried to put a focus on everything we did on users on their phones primarily. But as focused as we were on that, we were also fairly vocal, some would say stubborn, about not wanting to create a native app. We thought that the web was the better way for a news organization like ours starting in 2012 to grow quickly. And 2012 was the year, you might recall, News Corp had experimented with an iPad-only newspaper called The Daily that had just folded at that time. I think a lot of news organizations had gone through a phase of developing apps that had mixed results at best. So we figured we would just skip that phase and move right to the web. And to be clear, we still feel that way. I mean, that is still a conviction of Quartz. But around the beginning of last year, we challenged ourselves to figure out what a Quartz app, a native app, could be if it were not a facsimile of our website, which was basically all we had conviction about, is that we didn't want to create an app that was just a copy of the site. And so we ended up with this. Or maybe a little bit more descriptively, this, which we just decided we were going to put this thing out there and try to explain it as little as possible. Of course, I'll explain it today, but and see how users like it. Obviously, it was not what most people were expecting from a news app. It's a conversational interface resembling as though you are text messaging with Quartz, and this is pretty much it. I mean, there's a settings screen. There are a few other features I'll talk about in a second, but it's obviously not a scan of headlines. So what I wanted to do, now we're about 2 months in, the reception has been kind of honestly better than we were expecting. You know, we obviously liked the idea, but we knew it was a little nuts. Didn't know how anyone else would react. And I wanted to give the story briefly of how we got to this, because trust me, it was a long time coming, and went through a lot of failure before we got to anything vaguely resembling the app that we launched in February. So the project began with notifications. We were looking around. There were a number of changes to iOS and Android about a year ago that were interesting to us, that started to make notifications shift from this annoying thing that was buzzing your phone and you'd sort of scramble to figure out how to turn them off, to potentially actually useful, possibly even replacing the inbox for a lot of people. And we also saw some opportunity to improve on the way news organizations were approaching notifications, especially at that time. I think, honestly, in the last 12 to 18 months, things have improved considerably. But a lot of news organizations were thinking of notifications as basically a breaking news, sort of an inscrutable breaking news headline, where to get the actual news, you had to click through, read a full article. We figured you could probably put a lot more information and context right on the lock screen and provide a great experience to people without even having to enter the app at all. That was appealing because we did have this sense that it was harder and harder to break into the App Store, get people to download your app. We figured, an experience that would be delightful and informative on your lock screen could be something people would actually take the steps to download and probably even enjoy. So that was pretty easy. You'll see the name here on that alert, which an actual one from our testing phase is Jasper, and that's the code name of this entire project as it continues. We called the app itself Quartz, but Jasper is a form of quartz, the mineral. And the way we were thinking about this is challenging ourselves to figure out what Quartz, a guide to the new global economy, would be if it were a native app. So this part was honestly pretty simple, both to think about and to build. The harder question was what the hell would go inside the app? And this was one of the prototypes. Maybe we just put absolutely nothing inside the app. You open it, and it conveys very strongly that you should be going away and experiencing this app outside of its container, which was very appealing because we could have shipped it a year ago. But we decided to challenge ourselves to figure out what, if not an empty box, the interior of the app could be. And I won't belabor this phase of the project, which was a long one. We went through a long prototype phase where we were working on options, two of which are shown here. One was essentially an archive of that notifications concept. Another, of course, was card-based, because you can't do an app project without at least spending some time thinking about cards these days. All of which were fine, but not particularly appealing. And there were a number of other prototypes I'm not showing here before we got to conversation. And there are a variety of reasons why we thought this might be an interesting idea. And you're looking at a prototype we built to test the idea once we had started in on it. But the two basic ones were we love the simplicity, both the simplicity for the user. There was very little to do except you manipulate your thumb along the bottom of the screen to choose options. That was both like a practical design choice, with larger and larger phones. Keeping all of the action toward the bottom has its appeal, as well as just the simplicity of the user understanding the concept. So as I said, we started with the idea of notifications and built from there. So this was essentially extending that. The whole thing is messages. The content comes in the form of messages, some of which you get on your lock screen, most of which you get in the interior of the app if you choose to essentially take the bait and initiate the conversation. We had no idea if this was anything more than an interesting concept, so we built this prototype, started using it. It was honestly more engaging than we expected. Of course, it was pretty ugly, so we started working on the interface to see what we. Oh, sorry. Those are animating great. We started working on the interface to try to improve its visual style. It was going along quite nicely, but we started to hit a wall. And the wall was that for all the intrigue of the idea of a conversational UI, the thing really lacked life. It was soulless. At the time, what we were doing, Quartz on our homepage, qz.com, we had sort of a continually updated news briefing that we were composing, and so we were pulling in that content to provide real live content for this app. And as we used it more and more, all the animations in the world could not disguise the fact that it really seemed like this guy was writing the app. This is an actual magazine cover from 1936 predicting what journalism would be in 2000. And this is really the good news of this story. So that was a little troubling because we thought, oh, we could get away with just pulling in this content we were already creating. But so that was bad news. But the good news is that you are all not yet out of jobs, because it was super, super clear that this was not really going to be a bot. I mean, it's automated. I'm sure we'll talk in a bit about what the definition of a bot is. There are elements programmatic elements to the app where you take advantage to try to be smart about what we deliver you and when and so forth. But it's really a human. In fact, 5 humans all around the world for Quartz who are writing and editing all of the content on a continual basis, because that was the only way, as Rebecca was arguing, I completely agree, to create an actually engaging conversational interface for news. So we sighed, and we started the next long project, which was to figure out what that content would be, how we would write it, how we would make that an efficient process for our writers. We started with drawing back on the choose your own adventure world, interactive fiction. There's a whole variety of tools that already exist for creating pathways through stories where the user has options. I'm sure we've all played with them in the past. That was super useful for prototyping and also made it super clear that this was not going to be an efficient process for continually writing news updates, and our editors would quit sooner than they would try to use a tool that looked like this, where they had to craft the news into this shape. So we started trying to simplify and reconstruct the experience, trying to essentially go from what was a very branching interface or options where the user had a lot of choices to make to a more and more linear interface, which had advantages both for the efficiency of our production of the content, but also we tended to find for the experience for the user, for the end user, that actually narrowing the options that the user has made a more enjoyable experience. And so if you're using the app, you know that it is an extremely linear experience, more resembling this one than the first spaghetti diagram that we started with. Of course, in order to write it, we needed a CMS. There are some more in the choose your own adventure world that exist, but nothing that really worked for us, so we had to do one from scratch. It's basically a WYSIWYG composer, which you're looking at right here, for constructing what we call frames, and then within each frame, mapping out what the conversation will be. While I'm in favor of WYSIWYG for all forms of writing, in this particular case is all the more important because you have to put yourself in the seat or in the thumbs, I guess, of the user, thinking about what it is exactly that she's going to receive at each stage in the conversation. And then also thinking and trying to anticipate what the questions might be. So we're not trying to produce this in sort of some kind of artificial intelligence news bot, right? This is every user is provided the same options. There is no keyboard. We're not taking free-form input. And so making sure that those choices we give the user, whether it's just as simple as an emoji or actual questions for the user to ask, become all the more important. And then trying to figure out like what is good about a conversational interface. Like what are the ways in which we can write that are better than if we had just written them out in the form of paragraphs, because you start to realize that what you're creating is not just like a news article. In fact, it's distinct from a news article in a lot of ways. It's an experience. And if we're not delighting the user with each of these sessions, then we're not doing much at all. The delight factor becomes much more important, honestly, than just the informational factor, because there are quite clearly a whole sort of more efficient ways to get this news. The reason you might tap on the Quartz icon on your phone is, I think, first and foremost, to be entertained, and then secondarily to be informed, which is a really interesting shift, I think, for a news organization to think about, but one we've found to be effective among the users who keep coming back to it. There are also ways to think about anticipating the user's questions. So you're scripting this. You're not actually giving the user choice, but you are putting yourself in the mindset of the user and thinking about what he or she might say when presented with an option. And that's a really interesting new form of writing that, honestly, we're still trying to figure out. And it does allow you to sometimes provide options like this, which I wish every news article came with. So as I said, we're still figuring that out. It's a really interesting new form of writing. And we're also still focused on the original intent of this project, which was to provide a great experience without even going into the app itself. Trying to write notifications which are information rich and include a lot of context do not require you to enter the app at all. And we send you poetry every day. So I love this juxtaposition of two notifications that came in within minutes of each other, one from us and one from the Wall Street Journal. And it's not even to suggest that our notification is better than the Journal's. Quite clearly, the Journal did a much more efficient job of conveying the way the markets had behaved that day. But we, at the end of the close of markets in the US, every day, send users a haiku summary of the markets. It fits our view of the markets, which is not to take them too seriously, at least on a daily basis, and is intended to just be this little bit of joy on your lock screen at the end of the day. And I think this really clearly distinguished the approaches. And again, to each his own as to which of these notifications you would like to receive. Maybe it's even best to subscribe to both, and so you get the like what the hell actually happened along with the haiku. Also focusing on the touches. So I think I sent this particular notification out and was about to send, but with each notification we send, we also include a little, so you may know if you're an iOS user, you can swipe on any notification for an interactive, to be able to interact with the notification right then and there. And so we include just a little emoji with each one. Essentially as an Easter egg. So you would not believe like the conversations that come that occur in our newsroom, or we're scrambling to send a breaking news alert. Obviously, time is of the essence, but now we need to figure out what the hell the emoji going along with this news should be. I thought I'd nailed this one, so that's why I'm using this one as an example. And of course, focusing on still other experiences outside the app. So a chart of the day on your today's screen. And if you're an Apple Watch user, you can get your markets wrap up again with a little eccentricity, this time in the bottom right corner, telling you how the markets are doing in the form of an emoji. Obviously, this was not a great day for the markets. So that's the story of how we got to Quartz for iPhone. Still working on it. Still very much focused also on other platforms. And thank you for having me.